Welcome to Modern Anarchy, the podcast exploring sex, relationships, and liberation. I'm your host, Nicole.
I tried to keep her quiet, but she's screaming inside of me. I tried to keep her hiding, oh, shut up. I tried to keep her quiet, but she's a wild, wild woman.
On today's episode, we have Thickie Comrade. Join us for a conversation all about reclaiming our pleasure. Together we talk about demonic nose piercings, rewriting the meaning of family, and planting trees for future generations. Hello, dear listener, and welcome back to Modern Anarchy. I am so delighted to have all of you pleasure activists from around the world tuning in for another episode each Wednesday. My name is Nicole. I am a sex and relationship psychotherapist with training in psychedelic integration therapy. And I am also the founder of the Pleasure Practice, supporting individuals in crafting expansive sex lives and intimate relationships. Dear listener, y'all are going to love this episode. It's so fun, so fun. Thickie and I laugh and laugh and laugh. And as I was editing it back, I was just thinking about the power of queer laughter. Dear listener, it has been quite the journey for me and so many of my queer community and lovers to unlearn purity culture and to thrive under these systems and to be able to laugh and find community together. Wow. What a political act of resistance. And it is the community that transforms us, right? When I was in purity culture, it was all my friends who reinforced that. And the life that I live now is surrounded by some really radical queer community, which I am so grateful for. And I really hope, dear listener, that wherever you are in the world, that you have a beautiful community of queer, liberated souls that are singing and dancing and laughing with you. All right, dear listener, if you are ready to liberate your pleasure, you can explore my offerings and resources at modernanarchypodcast.com, linked in the show notes below. And I want to say the biggest thank you to all of my Patreon supporters. You are supporting the long-term sustainability of the podcast, keeping this content free and accessible to all people, so thank you. If you want to join the Patreon community, get exclusive access into my research and personal exploration, you can head on over to patreon.com/modernanarchypodcast, also linked in the show notes below. And with that, dear listener, please know that I'm sending you all of my love, and let's tune in to today's episode.
Yeah. I'm so excited.
Cool. Well then, the first question I ask each guest is, how would you like to introduce yourself to the listeners?
This is something that upon hearing this, I was like, okay, so how am I going to answer this?
Yeah.
And I spent so long with it. And I
Thinking
was
about
like,
it. I love
in
it.
this constant state of turmoil about it. Because
Oh, no.
I just moved from Minneapolis to Philadelphia.
Okay.
I've estranged myself from my family. I'm in a very transitionary point in my life. So I was like, who even am I anymore? It's such
what a big question.
Yeah, so when I heard you ask that to start, I'm like, oh God, okay, how am I going to answer this? And what I've kind of come along in my journey of self-discovery is I really identify with that public universal friend, but I just want to tweak it ever so slightly. And instead of being for those who maybe aren't as aware, public universal friend had some more religious Quakerisms that I personally am not as big of a fan of. With my Christian upbringing, that kind of sets off a couple signals in my head where I'm like, ooh, I'm not trying to get involved in that. So let me be a little bit less serious about myself. And so I've kind of like in my journey of finding myself have really started to identify with this term of mom rad. So like
Mm,
being somebody that's like unconditionally like giving in a very like indiscriminate, much more open to like as I kind of see myself as like a recharge station for like the people that I
yeah,
interact with, where I can kind of like be that kind of person that, you know, on one hand, I'm, you know, maybe listening to them, hearing what they're going through, giving them that touch that maybe they need in that moment and being there for them. But then I've also come to learn that like being a good mom rad means also allowing myself to be helped by those people.
sure,
So that
yeah.
way they can feel like they're also, you know, being a part of this relationship that we have going on.
Hmm.
And that for me was like, and honestly still kind of is something that I'm struggling with, especially
Sure.
like with my move. You know, I'm very poor. I've been very poor for a lot of my life.
Yeah,
And so like that move was very hard for me financially. And I had to be
sure.
okay with accepting help from people in like large amounts of money in ways that I'm like, I would be fine if I had the money to be like, here's, you know, the $400 that you're missing. I would love to help you with that. Like I
Hmm.
have no problem if I have that kind of money to help the people around me. But like
Sure.
to be that person that's accepting that help
Sure.
is so
To
hard. And
receive
like,
love, yeah.
yeah, and it's something that I've, you know, as I've been learning more about myself and evolving and growing as a person, like the public universal mom rad idea in
Yeah,
my head has been something that I'm like so identifying with. Like
sure.
I never thought that it's kind of maybe sad, but I think a very real thing that a lot of young queer people go through similarly is that like I never thought I was going to live to be older than 30 years old.
Mm.
So now that I'm here and older than 30 years old, I'm like, so now what do I do?
Yeah, sure, sure.
Now here I am and I'm living longer than I expected
Yep.
and I'm still trying to figure out what exactly is going on in my life,
Right.
but like I don't know, so is everybody else. You know,
Totally.
like
We're gonna be
everyone's trying to
90.
figure it out.
Yeah, doing the
Exactly.
same thing, going,
Oh, girl,
figuring it out.
literally, I that has been the most humbling thing. I every time in my life, like big key moments, I'm like, I've got it figured out. And it finally at like 33, I'm like, I don't have
Nope.
shit figured out. And actually, like
Yeah,
nobody else does either. Like
totally,
it's
totally.
fine. We're all figuring out as we go.
Learning every single
Yeah.
day. So what a joy to meet you today and wherever
Mm-hmm.
you're at and wherever I'm at today.
Exactly. Exactly.
And yeah, it's so hard to receive love, right? So hard. And so what an exciting space for me to hold for you
Yeah.
and
Oh
your
my God.
story. So I
Yeah.
will be holding that love for you so you can let go
Oh,
and
thank you.
trust that I will do that for you today. So I know we talked a little bit about, your early childhood and kind of where it
Yeah.
started within religion, which is always a spicy topic for the podcast. So I'm curious, where would you want to take me and all of the listeners in that journey for you?
Yeah. So I would say I grew up in a really small town in Minnesota. That was kind of where it all started. And there was
Mm,
only maybe like, I think there was only like two or three churches in the city. Population was like, I don't know, I think it was like 2 or 3 thousand. It wasn't very
okay.
big.
Yeah.
So you kind of, everybody knew each other and the churches kind of became like factions where like,
Yeah, sure.
if you went to, you know, church X, then you were friends with the people that went to church X. And if
It's a
you were
sorority.
somebody, yeah, you know,
Yeah,
it
yeah, you got
became
your
really
people.
weird to be like
Yeah.
so like, oh my God, I'm rallying behind this church. And it was like, I don't know. I think as I think back, I'm like, I think I knew that something was amiss, but at the same time, I was so convinced that like I was going to hell for any number of reasons. You know, every time I hear a new reason, I'm like, oh my God, I'm a sinner for that too. Like
Every day.
it,
Yeah.
it doesn't end. It's just
No.
you're constantly a sinner. And so you're
Yep.
just constantly like berating yourself for these things. And so the church that I was attending was very like I think they do identify now as like more non-denominational. Like they've kind of like opened their doors to be more open to queer people. But with
Sure.
that also being said, when I came out, I like every single person that I was friends with on any kind of social media, like blocked me, deleted me.
Whoa.
Like it was
Whoa.
like a total shift. Like my mom was
Sure.
getting calls from like fourth grade teachers being like, I can't believe you would allow your son to do this kind of thing. And I was just like, man,
Can
I
I
haven't, yeah, sorry.
can I ask how old you were at this point?
Yeah, I came out pretty late. I was like 23 years old.
You're
So
23 and they're
yeah.
messaging your mom to be
And
like, sorry.
no, it's
I was like, I had
so
to know if you were a child or you're a full adult. Like,
a
okay.
full grown it gets even worse because I'm a full grown adult. I'm in college. I haven't lived in that city since fourth grade. So
Whoa.
like these people I have no contact, I've had no contact with
They're worried about you.
whatsoever.
Yeah.
And they're worried about the fact that I'm kissing boys at college. Like it
Your
was anyway.
salvation is on the line. Of course, I
It,
must
oh my
must reach
God.
out to your mom.
No, and like
Woo!
this nose piercing, they were convinced because I got really sick and I was like in the hospital for 2 weeks because I turned out I had Epstein-Barr and West Nile
Oh
virus at the
no.
same time.
God.
My mom got an email from one of the old pastors that was saying something like, if your son would take out his nose ring, I can guarantee you that he would become healed because this nose ring is blocking the chakras that are allowing his body to heal properly. He was like, I'm sorry. My nose ring is not what is it was I got
The devil.
I will give you maybe I got Epstein-Barr from making out with a boy, maybe.
Sure.
But it's not because I was making out with a boy. It was because I was making out in general, not because it was a boy. It was
It's
just,
hilarious.
exactly. Yeah. It was so, but like they were just so like missionary about it, I guess.
Yeah.
Like it was so like an affront to the church to and it
Mm.
like I went to the church had a private school across the street
Oh
that
no.
yeah that unfortunately I attended. Um
Oof. So you double down like me. You got it on the weekends and the weekdays. It was
every
intense. Yeah.
single day. I still to this day, if I hear a Bible verse start
I
being recited, I'm
know.
like, oh, I know the rest of that, baby. I can recite that all
Totally.
the way. Or
Totally.
I still hear hymns like my friends and I will crack up because I can like start singing these hymns like from nowhere. I'll just like
Yeah.
I'll hear a word and I'll be like, I am a C, I am
I
a
am a
CH.
CH. I am a CHRSDI. Yeah, I'll go. Right. I'll go. Let's go. Let's throw down hymns for an
It's
hour.
exactly like I'm like I find
Uh,
it so hilarious, but at
yeah.
the same time, it really started to make me realize like how brainwashed I had become
Oh
to all these
yeah.
things that I just kind of was like, oh, this is like a totally normal thing, you know? Like this is
Mhm.
just like fine. And it's not.
Yeah. I
Um
know.
but I was going to this church for kindergarten through fourth grade, and there were a couple times when like my family likes to say that I'm like an old soul. And so there were a
Mm.
couple times when they would like let me go to the adult services. And I still to this day remember like the pastor talking in one of these adult sermons about how like all of the sinners are going to sit in a boiling pot and they're going to like grind their teeth down to the gums. And it's
Right.
like this whole horror story. And I'm sitting there
Yes.
like, I'm one of these sinners. I remember this sermon, and I used that sermon as a reference when I was talking to my mom about
Yeah.
coming when I came out to her.
Mm.
I was like, this is when I was going to church, you took me to this sermon. And I remember hearing this, and I remember thinking, oh my God, if I don't do everything in my power to be as good of a Christian, whatever that means, as I can, I'm going to end up in eternal damnation and I'm going to
Right.
be like in this boiling pot forever.
Right.
And like, I guess now I realize now that it was much more like communistic way of thinking rather than like the much more, fascist way of thinking that Christianity has kind of been perverted into nowadays. And so I kind of like took up more of this like wanting to fight for everybody. And so like
Mm.
that's maybe more or less where my like radicalization differs from like the rest of my family because
Mhm.
like they all kind of stuck to the much more like rigidity of the teachings, and I kind of more of saw it as like a this is like the playbook on how to get to heaven, and you got to do as
Right.
many of these things so that way God
Right.
will like sit there and tally it up, and he'll be like, but you were kissing boys, but you did go help at the food kitchen, so
Mm-hmm.
maybe I'll let you in because you were at least doing these other things. That was where my
Right.
mind was. And so my
Sure.
mom like took my coming out very like, I stunted my child in making them go to this service like every single day and every single weekend. It was like I wasn't allowed to do anything else. And I took it so seriously because I was like, I can't go to hell. So I have
Yeah.
to, I need to go to the Wednesday night Awanas. I need to
Right.
go to like
Awana. Damn. The
I need to do
money, the
all of
fake
this.
money.
You
Yeah,
know,
I
like
do
I had to do all of these things. And I'm
know.
like, I hated it.
Yeah.
I
I
hated it.
know.
And here I am doing it.
Totally. And I'm gonna say, I feel like most people I've recorded with, maybe it's, confirmation bias because we're all
Yeah.
out now, right? But like everyone I've recorded with about this topic is always like, I was in it and it felt wrong. I
Yeah.
don't know what it was, but something in my body was just like, okay, I'm hearing this, I'm in it, but like, oof, like this just like we were being, and I think that's our internal healing wisdom to be
Yeah.
like, this does not feel right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
So I think a lot of people went through that. And for me, like, I mean, I call it mental abuse, right? I have a really,
Yeah.
yeah, I have a really hard time as a therapist, right? Where I'm like holding cultural differences and allowing, supporting different cultures. But the reality is, apart from that job that I do, right? When I have a Christian come into my room, they're not usually there about that, right? So it's like
Sure.
not the point of conversation, right? But
Yeah.
outside of that work, when we look at that actual culture, and it's not all of Christianity, right? But specific to the ones you were in, the ones I was in, all the other people, it's not safe to be queer, let alone kinky, non-monogamous, etc., etc., etc. But like, not even safe to be queer without going to hell, which is abuse,
Yeah.
abuse, abuse, and to be in a paradigm where you are taught from a young age to that you're going to go to hell if you sin, right? And for me, I was taught that my thoughts, I mean, that's in the Bible, right? That if you think about murder, you've already committed it in the eyes of the
Hmm.
Lord. AKA, now, if I'm a really good Christian little girl like I was, I now have to watch every single thought in my head because God forbid
Exactly.
I thought one bad thought, that could be the moment that if I get hit by a car right now, I could go straight to hell. Fuck. So then
You
all
get
day
it.
long, I'm just going, okay, okay, scan thoughts, scan thoughts, scan thoughts. And now as a therapist, I'm like, that is a recipe for anxiety if I've ever heard one. Oh my God. Right. So like, yeah, I call it abuse, right? And it's
Yeah.
it's
And it
not okay.
is. No, and it absolutely is.
Woo!
That is, I feel very similarly. And that's why I started this by saying like I'm always down to talk about how awful the Christian religion specifically
Totally.
has become, because
Yeah.
like I see myself as like a newer, like, far left or anarchist, whatever
Sure.
kind of terminology. I've,
Welcome.
yeah, thank you. I've kind of like within the last like 2 years have kind of like really started to dive down into
Cool.
this journey and what it means, and like, becoming really critical of literally everything in my life. And
Yep.
I obviously I wouldn't wish Christianity as it is now on anyone, but I do think that it taught me to be very critical of the people in my life around me, including my family. And that's something that like was really hard growing up. It was always like, if there's nobody else, at least you have your parents and your brothers and your sister and whatever. Like there's always, at least you have your family there with you. And I could never figure out why that was like still not enough for me. And it
Mm.
took me reading these more radical texts to be like, oh, it's because these people don't love me. And it's because they've been telling me that they love me. And I don't know what love is anymore because it's been being
Right.
robbed from me.
Right.
And I had to like, start actually like taking inventory of like, what does it mean for me to say that I love somebody? Why is it so hard for me
Mm.
to say I love you to somebody who I do love?
Yeah.
But like I would have a hard time saying that before I
Mm.
started going down this journey. I'd be like, well, that's a word
Sure.
I'm supposed to save for like, the man of my dreams or whatever. There's
Sure.
not like room for that word to be used when it's not used as intended or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
so like I'm very new to this journey, and I am very excited for what the doors that it's opening, and I'm
Yeah.
just like so thankful for, well, I don't know if thankful is maybe the right word, but I appreciate what I've been through in order to, really care about what I'm doing now.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. I think we can look back on past experiences and see that they were painful, difficult, and also be in a space now to see, like, I see the benefits of what that journey was, right? You want to talk about psychedelics later, right? Like, talk about that. It
Yes.
was a bad trip, but I learned a lot. You know what I mean?
I
Yeah.
have like a little I've dabbled in mushrooms here and there, and I had like the most life-changing epiphany experience where I was just like,
Beautiful.
it was so surreal and I was so happy and I was like, I'm cured. This is everyone needs to be doing this. This needs to be everyone needs to be doing this. And then I did have a bad trip and I haven't touched them since. Not like it wasn't anything bad. It was like I did it all wrong. I like threw big chunks on like my mac and cheese bowl and like it didn't digest very well because I didn't
Sure,
eat anything else. I
sure,
was like literally poisoned. And so like I just had like a bad time. And I was
sure.
like, okay, actually maybe not. Maybe
Right.
this isn't the, the
The answer.
golden tool that I
Right.
thought it was. Maybe this isn't the fix all. Maybe this doesn't actually
I
like cure
know.
me of all of my religious traumas. But
But
I'm still like, I did have that experience where I was like, all of that weight of like constantly surveilling myself because I still unfortunately find myself doing
sure.
sometimes just with, being grown up in that,
Right.
self-regulating, have to make sure I'm not having bad thoughts kind
Yeah.
of mentality,
God,
you
yeah.
know, all of that kind of got taken off my shoulders for those like 2.5 hours. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
wow, this is incredible. And
Profound.
yeah, and I would really love to like say that I like took something from that experience into the non I forget what the terminology that you all
Ordinary
use.
states of
Yeah, yeah,
consciousness.
thank you.
Because,
Yeah.
like, I'm on caffeine right now, so I'm drugged. Let's be clear. I had
Yeah,
some tea this morning, you
yeah, and
know?
I just had some caffeine before I got on here.
Right.
Like
So I say ordinary, whatever our
yeah,
ordinary is,
yeah,
not
whatever your
sober.
regular is. Exactly. Yeah. Like I love that terminology that you've introduced into my life because
Mm,
I for with being, raised so religious, I was straight edge until I was 18. Like I was
totally,
like, I'm
totally.
not touching alcohol, I'm not touching anything. I can't even like kiss girls because that might lead to me have or kiss any gender people
Right, right.
because that might lead to me thinking that I want to have sex with them. And I was
Oh
still like
no. Yeah.
being in the church where I was being taught that like if I even thought about
Right,
masturbating, I was like
right,
already committing a sin. It
right,
was like I can't do
right,
anything because
right,
if I do any of that stuff, it might make the bad thoughts come out. So like I can't touch
right.
any of that. And so like it made me like think that like all these things were bad. And then like I found a really great group of like young, and now we've all kind of come to terms with our queerness. But at the
Cool.
time we were kind of like not not as sure of our
Yeah.
queerness. But like, we've all kind of come out in some capacity. But like my 18th birthday, they like I kind of got tricked into drinking alcohol, but like, I don't know, it kind of all turned out for the best. So like, I
Mhm.
don't know, like the person told me that it was just blue Kool-Aid, but it turned
Oh
out it was
no.
UV blue. I don't, it wasn't like, yeah, it was bad, but
It's
like
non-consensual,
yeah,
but
but it did end up like turning out really great because that night I drank for the first time, I smoked weed for the first time, and I kissed a boy. So like,
fun.
it was like a really great 18th birthday that like turned out really great.
Totally, which like I think there's also it's important to name just when you've been so repressed,
Mm,
right? We talk about drugs as tools, right? Psychedelics being
yeah.
tools. Alcohol was certainly a tool for me in my first queer awakening, right? You turn that down instead of up, and
Yeah,
I felt really free to be able to express things I've always wanted to do, right? So I think
yeah,
that's an important conversation too.
totally. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, introducing that like ordinary state of consciousness was just
Mhm.
like very like eye-opening to the I'm not like prudish when it comes to the idea of these things anymore, but there is still some sort of like underlying like am I gonna get addicted right away? Like, I don't know. There's
Sure,
still
it's
like some things that like sit in my mind from all of those Dare award,
yeah,
all of those things that I went through that like
totally.
in
Yeah,
my consciousness, I'm like, okay, let's be for real. It's really not that
I
deep. But
know.
but
I
like
know.
but like in my mind, there's still like that hurdle that I place for myself that like makes this hard.
Well, totally. And I think that's where it's like the systems, right? Where it's the
Yeah.
systems and the way they impact us. And, right, I just think about the amount of, I don't even know how many years it took or weeks it took for me to not feel guilty on Sunday when I wasn't going to church. Like it literally took a long time where now I can wake up on Sunday and not even think about it, right? And I
Hmm.
think when we're, looking at these systems, there's a lot of problematic systems that get internalized. And so it's kind of that consistent unpacking of like, oh, actually, even though that's inside my psyche, that's not really where I want to stay, right? The part of my past versions of self that would have judged men or people who presented as masculine for crying, right, or being soft as
Yeah.
unattractive. That's years of social conditioning of rom-coms, right? Like, but
Yeah.
once I see that, it doesn't mean we just stay there. We actually have to like dig that shit out, right? But like there's so much of that
Totally.
is deep in. And particularly with drugs, it's another one of those spaces, right? I mean,
Yeah.
like the war on drugs and the people of color, right, with crack and cocaine. Like cocaine
Yeah.
somehow super cool, but crack's bad, right? Like all these different things. And like I can work in a place where we do ketamine assisted psychotherapy. And like if you're injecting the needle from an intramuscular shot from a physician, that's one thing. But if you're using a needle for heroin, if you're snorting the ketamine, oh my God, now it feels like you're doing the bad drug thing. But totally cool if the
Hmm.
nurse practitioner comes by and gives you the needle here, right? I guess it's in the muscle versus the vein with hair, like we can get into the specifics of it, but it's all like the society and the meaning making that really shapes
Totally.
how we look at this. I remember telling
Hmm.
myself when I was younger, I was like, you know what? Because I was Christian, I was like, maybe when I'm 80 years old and I'm on my deathbed, I'll try that crazy thing called Molly. I'll try that crazy thing called mushrooms. And I'm so glad I didn't wait. But like that's how I thought about it. It was like once I'm
Yeah.
dying, then I'll do it. Which is just so absurd too when we think about like there's the sacred mushroom and the cross. Have you heard about
Oh,
that?
yeah.
Yeah, so the
Hmm.
thought that maybe Christianity actually was an Eastern fertility mushroom cult. Fun,
Yeah.
fun
Yeah.
potential origins. And or just like the use of alcohol in sacrament. Like the Christian church has been using drugs,
Yeah.
my friends.
Like it really makes it hard for me to not like focus on how much of Christianity specifically now is such a system of double standards that is set in place to make sure that all of the people that are attending the service continue to give the church money, and that's supposed to save them. Like
Mm.
it's really, I'm very thankful for my mom in being so understanding of my complete separation from the church entirely. Like everyone in my family knows that like don't even bother asking if I want to go to the Sunday service because
Good,
like
yeah.
I'm not going to go, or like
Mm-hmm.
Christmas, Thanksgiving, whatever. They all still kind of go more or less, but like my mom has started being very vocal in at least the relationships at home, in that like I don't want to go to a church that tells me that my son is going to be damned forever. So
Right.
like I'll go to a church as long as they're not saying those things. So like
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate that, and we're still kind of like we kind of just more or less don't talk about religion at all, which
Yeah.
maybe for the best, but I'm trying to be more understanding of the people that continue to practice Christianity specifically and consider themselves allies to me,
Mm-hmm.
because I find that contradictory because of how traumatizing and perverted, for lack of better words, I guess, the Christian church has become, and everything that I stand for now. It kind of feels like I hate to like draw a line in the sand of being like it's us or it's me or them, but like religion is a touchy subject in general, but I find I'm a lot more accepting of other ones other than Christianity. And that's something that has been brought to my attention before. And I'm not exactly sure if that's something that I intend on changing anytime soon. And
Yeah.
I think, I've kind of like come to terms with that more or less, as I have some family that live here, extended family, an aunt and uncle that are
Mm-hmm.
missionaries, and they've reached out a couple times, and I had to just recently send an email and just say like, I appreciate you all for, the love that you showed me, you know,
Mm-hmm.
the the maybe 5 times I've met met you in my entire
Yeah.
life, but like I just I don't know if there's anything for us to like talk
Sure.
about, let alone
Yeah.
like I'm supposed to go get lunch with you and supposed to just like act like, you know, everything's fine when you're like preaching that you want me and my other comrades to burn in hell. That
Mm-hmm.
there's like the contradictories that lie within the
Totally.
Christian church specifically is really hard for me to battle when it comes to keeping an open heart and an open mind to people that want to become more radical in their thinking and more critical in their
Yeah.
everyday life.
Right. Yeah. Such a tricky space to
Yeah.
be in, particularly when it's your family, right? Hard,
And
really difficult. And I think, ultimately we don't have to be friends with our abusers, right? Let's
right.
put that out there. Like
Yeah.
boundaries against our abusers are helpful and
Yeah.
necessary, right? And
And it makes it even
yeah,
harder when that's like,
your
your
family.
family.
Oh
And
yeah.
it finding the concept of family abolition, that kind of is what sparked my like really like radicalized journey, and really kind of how I see myself as like this public universal friend
Mm-hmm.
figure, is like I see my former self as like dying before I started learning about this stuff. And as I've kind of like come to terms with what does family abolition mean at all, let alone to me,
Mm-hmm.
but what does that mean to me specifically, has really like made myself become okay with like being this queer person that like
Yeah.
doesn't have these attachments to these my abusers, like that my family was my abusers. And so that's been like a hard journey to, reclaim, and that
Yeah.
like even trying to become more comfortable with presenting myself as the name that I've chosen for myself instead of
Mm-hmm.
the name that my family had given me, which is,
Sure.
a very biblical name. It's something that I would like to try to distance myself as much as I can from
Sure.
that. But there's still like this weird, like, if I introduce myself by my nickname, then these people don't know me. But it's like, no,
Mm,
those people know me probably better for knowing me for the nickname rather than
sure.
the name that my family has given me. Because
Mm-hmm.
while yes, I've identified as that name for like 32 years, it's something that like I don't identify with now, which
Right.
has also been a very interesting journey for me. I find
Totally.
myself still like dead naming myself when I'm out at the bars, and I'm like,
Yeah.
why am I doing this to myself? Why am I
Yeah.
doing this to myself? Like,
Yeah.
I'm in a whole new city. I'm so far away from anyone who knew
Sure.
me by that name. Like, why am I holding on to this? And so,
Totally.
yeah, I'm very interested in the psychedelic healing of being able to just shed myself of that like
Mm-hmm.
former being, and allowing myself to find newer ways of like love and expression that I think would be, maybe you can attest
Sure.
to this. I feel like that would be a helpful tool for that, because when I had taken those shrooms, I had maybe only came out like 2 or 3 years after that, but I had very
Mm-hmm.
like I had this like epiphany sitting on my friend's like couch in the garage, and I'm like looking outside and looking up at the stars. I'm like, I am so small.
Mm.
This where if there is some creator that's like way up there or whatever, there's
Yeah.
no way that they are concerned about if I'm kissing boys or not. There's just no way. There's no
Mm-hmm.
way that that's what this person, whatever, this
Yeah.
figure is
Yeah.
concerned about. That trip really helped me like that was probably the one big takeaway from that trip, was
Cool.
like I had this like I've been holding on to this for so long, and this
Totally.
like I've known this, but like I didn't allow myself to feel this until now.
Mm-hmm. Profound. And to be
Yeah.
able to like take that, and still integrate it as we're having this conversation of how it's
Mm.
landing with you and moving forward, right? If I was doing some therapy integration, be like, yeah, like,
Yeah.
well, how does that move in praxis? Let's go deeper, right? So, but I just, I don't know how this will land for you or not, so you can let me
Oh,
know. But like reclaiming spirituality outside of the frameworks of religion has been a long journey for me. And I was just thinking about how, you know, it's so funny. Like we, I guess first I'll say I believe that whoever the creator is of the universe or whatever the hell that is, I think that they want love. And I think that they want us to be in loving connection with one another. And one of the ways that I do that is through pleasure in the body. And so
yeah,
I believe in the divine power of that. I first just got to name that. But then
totally.
beyond that, when you were talking just about like your story, right? Thinking about, remember when people would get up and they'd give their like testimony, like, here you are giving your testimony to me and thousands of listeners, right? Of like, here it is,
Yeah.
and then to be talking about how that part of you in the past was dead, right? Thinking just about the baptism metaphors of like, we died and come out, like, so that part of you is dead. And then you were talking about your name, right? And even in the Bible, they would give people, the disciples, when they transformed,
Yeah.
to be like, here's your name, your new name moving forward, right? Like all these different ways that it kind of like parallels. I think it can be hard, because the second we say spirituality, it almost just goes straight into the trauma, but there's still so much of a spiritual journey,
So much.
unfolding
Yeah.
in this space for you and unfolding further, right? So, yeah, I just hold that. But I mean, I'm happy to dive into the psychedelics part too.
Yeah, no, for sure. We could definitely do that. I'm so interested in that. I will say before we pivot too far from it, I've become I've been reading Braiding Sweetgrass, and now
Oh,
I'm
I've
gonna like
heard of
forget
this.
who the author
Yes.
is, but it's very much like kind of like becoming more attuned to nature and the
Mm,
planet itself. And like
yeah.
I find so much, I don't want to say necessarily similarities, but there is like this like spiritual aspect of the book that I find very reassuring, I guess.
Yeah.
There was always like there's this aspect of Christianity. It was always like such like a hard battle for me in my head because I would feel this like love from the people around me in this church that were like giving my family food in order for us to eat. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like there was like so much of this like love and care that
Yeah.
was like being shared. And so I was like, there is this like love and compassion that's there. There's so many different things that you have to do in order to get it. So like it's not really free. And I think that's more or less where like the braiding sweetgrass comes in, where it's
Hmm.
kind of like these things are given to us by the planet. We have to work in tandem with it. So like you have to be willing to like do things in order to help keep the planet alive, as these
Hmm.
like as capitalism continues to choke out the planet, like there is like a certain spirituality that comes with the world around us that I've become so much more open to.
Mm.
Whereas I was so hard stuck in like if I hear any kind of religion, I don't want any part of it. And now I'm like,
Right.
well, maybe there's something to
Yeah.
be said about the intention of like going out and doing these things in order to provide for the next generation that comes
Hmm.
after us, where it's like you're not necessarily making these in the book. There's this metaphor that she talks about where when you plant a tree, you're realizing that the tree that you're planting isn't for
Mm.
your immediate usage.
Yeah.
It's going to be like 2 or 3 generations down before that tree becomes something that's like providing
Right.
shade and shelter. It's like you have to do these things and make these intentions to help the planet and help the ecosystem and like
Hmm.
do these things that aren't just, you know, loving and caring for your neighbor is also, obviously very important to me
Right.
also, but like there's even more that we can be doing that I'm not necessarily going to put like a hierarchy to it. Obviously, I don't want to like say
Sure.
that you need to do this before you do this, but the Braiding Sweetgrass book has made me realize that like I haven't been doing that as much as I should.
Mm-mm,
And I
mm-hmm.
think that there's a lot of my life that I won't say is going to be fixed with it, but I am curious to see where that goes versus the more psychedelic aspect of things, or maybe how those things can work in tandem
Totally.
together. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I love when certain books speak to us, right?
Yeah.
Almost like sacred text, right? I definitely have a
Totally.
handful of books I'm thinking of in my head that I've read again and again and felt like, oh, there's just something in there. And I want to have even that book with me. Even sometimes we'll invite during the psychedelic experience for people to bring objects that are meaningful, right? So sometimes people
Oh,
will bring books. Like I've had clients bring
sure.
different books that were like, there's something in here, right? And a lot of what I'm hearing out of that is, the longevity, or at least for me, I find a lot of peace with death and the inevitability of that coming,
Mm.
knowing that people have lived before me and people will live after me as long as we don't kill the world with climate change too
Right,
hard.
right. Yeah.
But just knowing where I'm at in the lineage, right? Knowing that I can claim my sexual liberation today and claim my queerness and my relationship anarchy identity because of the people who have quite literally died, right? The trans, the people of color, all the
Totally.
people of queer, identity that have died for me to be in a space right now to have this conversation without fear, right? I mean,
Absolutely. Yeah.
I'm a part of standing on those shoulders and knowing that, yeah, the trees we plant today will build even more shade for future generations when we're having these
Totally.
conversations. And so that gives me some level of, just peace, I guess, knowing that I am going to die. And just like those other people, like the people will carry on the lineage. And I think that kind of like earlier when we were talking about systems to dig up, the system of particularly within Western culture, it's so individualistic. Particularly, we even have like a hierarchy of needs, Maslow, right?
Yeah.
Where like literally at the top is the individual. Damn it, like compared to like the community. Oh, like
Yeah.
wow, like I'm gonna die and the community is important. Let me think about that maybe being the highest thing rather than myself. Holy shit, So like hearing the book that you were talking about and the trees and the longevity of it, thinking back to community, I think that does tie into psychedelics because, you know, psychedelics are a tool
Hmm.
and it's a non-specific amplifier. Sure, some of them are more serotonin, affect our serotonin levels. Ketamine's
Totally.
more effective of the glutamate level. Like there are things going on there, but you can take a psychedelic and be surrounded by business capitalists who then say, "Oh my God, this is so amazing. How do we control this? Charge thousands of dollars so that we can go on our private jet."
Oh,
Versus having an experience in a community where like, wow, that was really profound. I'm feeling held and the war on drugs and that's fucked up. How do we
yeah.
start activate? Like those are
Yeah.
radically different spaces. The drug the same, but the community circle rather different,
Totally.
right? And so I think that like even that conversation about drugs, it's really where's the community and how are they shaping your thought process? Because we're all shaped by our community. That's what really was so difficult about Christianity is everyone around us looked and had the same value system and reinforced that system. And so to get out literally takes closing of doors to those people until
Hmm.
we get into a space where I can be like, oh yeah, I was in the dungeon this weekend. I was queer. Like I'm having
Yeah.
a party. My friends are like, hell yeah, what'd you do? Versus like maybe my mom or Christian folks are like,
Oh my God.
what? Like,
The things that
yeah.
I have been getting up to since moving here, like I had a thought the other day when I was thinking about, how R rated or what is the
What a juicy question. There is
yeah,
no limit here.
okay. I
Rar.
Okay, great.
Yes.
So I had a very fun weekend last weekend in which I was at a gay bar and I was, talking to a couple different boys and one thing led to another and
Hmm.
there was lots of fondling, dick sucking
Sure.
in the bar and it was like this very like I can't believe that I'm here and doing this. Like 15 years ago, I didn't think I was going to be alive for another day, let
Totally.
alone now I'm like so like unapologetically queer and loving the life that I have where I am able to like go to these spaces and do these things with like other queer people where like, you know, 50 years ago now this was a distant idea. Like
Yeah.
this was something that like was so I obviously I wasn't alive then, so I don't know. But I'm sure that these things were probably happening in some capacity
Right.
in some places. But like there was just something so liberating about it
Oh,
to be able to do it now.
absolutely.
And so I'm just like thinking about, as I want to continue pushing that boundary even further. And like, I find the abolition of family to be something that I've been told is too utopian to dream for. But it's like, if those people 50 years ago weren't fighting for what I have now, then I wouldn't be able to do these things that make me so happy. Like it was
Hmm.
like being able to be in these like openly queer spaces and being able to do these things where it's like being unapologetically queer and
Yeah.
embracing each other and being able to like love each other and feel each other in a very like open place was like
Hmm.
so liberating that like
Yeah.
it I can't recommend it enough. Everybody
I
needs to go out and do
know.
it.
Yeah. To be able to experience pleasure in your
Yeah.
body and
Yeah.
intimacy and connection, right? And there's
Totally.
endless ways to play with that, which is some of the many joys of life, the endless ways that you can play with that. Yeah, my brain's already spinning so many different
Yeah.
ideas, but that's why I'm the host of this podcast of sex and relationships because it is profound and it's
Yeah.
divine. Like you're having, I don't know what could be more divine than to be able to experience that pleasure in your body and share that with other people or on your own. That's cool too. But to be
Yeah.
able to share it and co-create that energy with other
Yeah.
people of
Oh
ecstasy
my
in the
God.
body, how
Totally.
gorgeous. And yes, to think about the people in the past who were literally killed for that right for you to have that, I do think it is then your responsibility to enjoy that pleasure and to carry that
So
torch
much.
even further and, like really hold that with pride. I think that's an important part of it is like, I have so much privilege. What do I want to do with that? I want to scream about these things and tell you what I'm doing because I know the shade that I'm building for future generations.
Exactly, exactly. And that's why I'm just like, I am kind of voyeuristic in my tendencies, but like even if you're not, I highly recommend at least just like doing a little PDA in a dark room. I don't know, there's something just so like it doesn't have to be secretive, but like
Right. And
being
there's
yeah,
consensual spaces to do that in, right? Like in
totally.
my city there are
Totally.
because like consent obviously becomes a question, right? And I think in gay bars there's a very normalized culture of this, and I think that's important
Totally.
for the conversation here. So then like within, dungeon spaces within the city, you can go to spaces where that is the point and like
Yeah.
is that church for me? Maybe.
You know,
Maybe. You know
that
what? There's a lot of
honestly, after this last weekend, that was something that I was like, oh, this is what those people were feeling on those Sunday
Yeah,
mornings. Like, this is
right.
why these people were speaking in tongues. Like, I get it
Yeah,
now
I
because
am so
now
right.
I am like, oh my God, this is the most pleasurable feeling ever that I'm able to like
Hmm.
be openly queer with these people around me and like experience this. And like, yeah, like you said, consent is necessary in these spaces. And that is something that as being a very like cis presenting queer person that I have been kind of reconciling with recently in that when I was a lot younger, I've always kind of been more voyeuristic, but I didn't understand why when it was not on my terms I didn't like it, but when it was on my terms I liked it. You
Yeah,
know what I mean?
consent,
Like,
huge.
yeah. And
Yeah.
so now as I'm older and I'm in these spaces where it's like all these people are consenting to this. Everyone that's in this place knows what's going on and
Right,
they're okay with it. And so
right,
now I like it.
right.
But when I was younger and I was like trying to navigate these queer spaces and like kind of talking about it with the people around me and they're like, "Oh, let's just go for it." And I'm like, "Well, but I'm not trying to make anybody else have a bad time." And like
Right.
I didn't have the voice to be able to stand up for myself and so like I was kind of like mm, I say prudish now, but I don't necessarily think that my reaction was prudish at the time. It was just I was like I don't want this because I don't. and
Yeah.
that should be enough. But like,
Right.
I didn't have the terminology to describe that, and so I was just like, why am I not being heard?
Right.
Why is what I'm saying not being understood? And now I'm learning that, there's more to it than that.
Totally. I mean, consent is huge, right? When
Yeah,
I'm walking down the street being catcalled and objectified, I'm not consenting to that in the same way if I
totally.
set up a scene where I'm asking to be the bottom or the sub and say, please objectify me and play with that. And the
Yeah,
difference there being consent and the power, right? I mean, that's
totally.
huge. So I think our culture is so like such a like broad brush strokes of sex because it's so puritanical and shame laden that like we can't even get into the nuance of this of like, hey, that's why this is really fun here when you're
Right.
consenting to it and not fun on the street, right? Like
Right.
those are, I just get angry with the feminists who are like, none of this can be feminist. I'm like, oh man, like there's a power in saying, please objectify me and hit me with the paddle, right?
Right.
Like I want to feel that
Yes.
sensation in my body. Like, damn it. Like, so I mean, I get up in uproars about that one,
I
but
I am right there with you,
yeah.
like I really am. Like it's something that I'm, like I said, it's all kind of new things for me that I'm learning and
Sure.
experiencing and allowing myself to experience. But like, not to continue on to this old thing that we've already rehashed, but like when I was younger and I would go to these gay bars, and like there's one example that I always think of in which like I was first time I had come out, I was
Hmm.
like my gay cousin took me to a bear bar because she was like, this is where you're gonna have the most fun because people are gonna be into you there. And I'm like
Yeah.
young, like 23 years old, literally came out that day. I was like,
Hmm.
okay, sure, let's
Yeah.
go.
Cute.
And I go, yeah, I
So
go to the
naive.
bath. Yeah, I go to the bathroom and this guy follows me and asks me if I need help. And I was like,
Yeah, oh no.
confused. I'm like, no,
More than just help, my
I've,
friend.
yeah, I was like, I've been doing this for 23 years. I think I know how to pee. And then the person just grabs me, and I was like, whoa, hey, like, you know,
Yeah.
I, I said no,
Right.
and I
Yes.
said no, and you continued on anyway, and
Ugh,
I
sorry.
no, it's not okay, but I have moved on from it.
Sure.
I've processed it. I have, it taught me that the reason why certain times when I was doing things and I didn't like it and I couldn't figure out why, I was like, oh, it's because I'm not consenting to it. And while yes, I do like to put on a show, I don't necessarily always want to put on a show. And so when I
Hmm.
want to set up that boundary of I'm only doing it in spaces where everyone that's around me is consenting to it,
Right.
that makes it more fun.
Hmm.
Whereas, like, when I'm going to the bar and some random person is just deciding for me that I'm putting on a show
Right.
and I'm not intending to put on a show, that's what makes it not fun. But like
Hmm.
when I was younger, I was like, I couldn't figure out what it was. I was like, why
Mm.
did that experience like it kind of made me start to like question if I was really gay, to be honest, because I was just like,
Sure.
like maybe for these last like 15 years that I've been struggling with my identity, maybe I'm not actually, and maybe I've been making this up all along, but obviously
Right.
not the case. But
I-
I
I've been
young
there.
mind trying
I've
to
been
figure out
there.
religion, trying to figure out what's going on, why you feel certain ways. And
Totally.
yeah, you get
The amount of the amount
it.
of days I spent going, am I a lesbian or queer? Lesbian? Queer. Lesbian.
Well,
Queer. And then I was like, stop asking the question, Nicole, and just enjoy yourself. And I
you
think
know,
there's so many
yeah,
different ways where that's true. And I started dating someone who's newer to like the kink world and all the things. And I was telling him, I was like, oh yeah, we could go to one of the dungeons, like we could go
yeah,
like just to watch. We don't have to
yeah,
do anything. We can just go observe. We can just go be voyeurs, you know?
hell
And
yeah.
he was like, you know, I don't really think the voyeur thing does it for me. Like, it doesn't really excite me. And I was like, really? I was like, do you watch porn? And he was like, yeah. Oh. And I was like,
You're
I
like,
was like, hey, I
see?
mean, you don't have to go to the dungeon with me. We don't have to do that. But I will make the assumption that if you're watching porn, you like to
There's
be
at
a
least
voyeur. Yeah.
a little bit of something, there's at least a little kernel that maybe we
Yes.
can just dig into and see where it goes. And if
It's
it
right
doesn't go
there.
anywhere, then it doesn't go anywhere. But
Right.
I find I had a very very good like first boyfriend, for lack of
Mm-hmm.
better words, experience, in that the person that I was kind of dating was very much into like an open relationship, and I being, freshly out and was in the church for so long, I was like, nope, if I'm doing gay, I've got to be monogamous. Like I
Sure.
have to.
Yeah.
And he was very like open to giving me that space, while also being like, okay, but like if we're going to continue, like I do want it to be an open relationship at some point. And
Yeah.
like it ended up not working out because I didn't want to. And now I'm like much more open, and he's married and committed to his partner. It's very funny.
We
We
all go
talk about
down
it. You know,
journeys. It changes, my friends. It changes.
he taught me this like this proverb, as I like to refer to it as, because I'm
Yeah,
so brainwashed into Christianity. But
sure.
um this, I'll try anything twice because maybe the first time was the wrong person. And
Mm,
I've, there's obviously my own certain things that I'm not as open to trying, but it did make me more open to, maybe being in a more like open, non-monogamous, not exactly sure.
sure.
At the time I wasn't exactly sure where I fell in that
Yeah.
spectrum, but it opened that door for me. And I was very thankful for him doing that, because prior to that, I was just like, I was already like, I'm barely okay with being gay. Like
Right.
now I need to battle with, okay, but my boyfriend's also wanting to go have fun with other people. And I was like,
Totally.
how do I do this? And now I'm like,
Yeah.
the more power to you. Like
Sure. Go
if
have
that's what you want
fun.
to do,
Go
go
play
for it.
on the
I love
playground.
it,
Come home to me,
literally.
please.
And even then it's like, if you don't come home, I don't care.
Totally.
Like I don't know. I'm so I've become so like open to just like
Mhm.
allowing people to love and play however they want. And as long
Totally.
as like, I don't know, as long as you're open to even having the touch of listening to me, that's kind of all I really need in order to feel like I'm being in a relationship in some capacity with the person. And
Right.
these are things that I never would have thought about. And when I moved here, I had kind of told my mom, like, I was like trying to explain to her, like, how I was thinking about my life, because she was like asking me, like, okay, are you still thinking about getting married? And I was like,
Uh,
no,
yeah.
like, don't plan on getting married anytime soon. And
Yeah.
she was like, okay, well, is there going to be like a partner that we're going to meet one day? And I was like, probably not,
Yeah.
because I don't want there to be any kind of like rehashing of old things with the family.
Mhm.
And like, I'm going to try my best to, keep the option open if there is somebody important to me, to at least introduce them to you. But like, I'm not going to force my partner to meet the family because
Yeah.
y'all are, my
Hard.
abusers. So
Yeah.
I'm not going to force anyone to go through that, let alone make me go through that again.
Hmm.
Um, and now I forgot where I was going with that.
No, that's okay. I mean, yeah, I think that makes sense to have those boundaries. And
Mhm.
I think just thinking about the journey, right? Change is the only constant. And yeah, the first time I heard about open relating, I was like, hell no, if you loved me, I'd be enough, right? And then you're like, oh, okay. And then you get into it and you're like, oh my, I don't know about you, but like the first time my partner's were with other people, I was like, oh my God, you know? And then like a few years later, you're like, oh, this is okay. Like this is
Yeah.
fine. And
Yeah.
this is where I think it's really fascinating to get to the space of like purity culture and a lot of that. And then they look at us and they're
Hmm.
like, you're so obsessed with the sex, you're so obsessed. And I'm like, I really don't care if my partner is playing a board game with someone or fucking them. Like it really doesn't matter. Like you said, the most important thing is, are they spending quality time with me?
Yeah,
They can go spend quality time with other people. What they do in that quality time, I don't care. Use
totally.
protection, so we're all safe, of course, but like I
That
assume that
part.
you use protection in all areas of your life so
Right.
that you keep all of your communities safe, right? But like
Right.
I'm not the one that's obsessed with sex as much as you are.
Well, and if I am obsessed with sex, so what? It's
Yeah,
fun.
totally.
And you should be
That's how I
also.
worship. That's how I worship. Yes. So it's a yes
Like
and yeah.
I'm like, it's very similar to how I feel in like when people tell me that I'm being selfish for choosing myself over trying to be there for my family. It's like,
Yeah.
who else is going to be there for me if not myself? Like, what else am I supposed to be centered
Mhm.
on if not
Mhm.
myself? Like, I've tried this whole centering myself on this like Christian religion, and that was disastrous. That is definitely not the answer. And right now, this being centered on myself is doing wonders for me. So I'm going to continue doing this until it's
Mhm.
not, and then maybe I can reassess then, and maybe then we can have the conversation
Yeah.
and figure out, maybe there is more room for me to be less self-centered or whatever that even means
Hmm.
anymore. But like,
Right.
it's hard when you grow up so like you're told that you need to be selfless, but then all of
Mm,
the actions of the church are selfish. So it's like,
yeah.
how do you, this, young religious person, how do you follow what people are saying in that you need to be selfless, or do you follow the church's selfishness? And like,
Yeah.
I don't know, there's definitely a need for both, but I think that, selfishness is not always a bad thing, especially when it comes to wanting to go out and do the things that you want to do.
Oh
Like
yeah.
fuck the people
Totally.
you want to go fuck.
Right. Totally. Yeah, I think that
Yeah.
it's like a very nuanced conversation of what does that word mean and what does
Mm,
it look like in praxis, right? Because you're right, you could, have difficult relationships with your family and relationships that you want to take space from and have boundaries with. And someone could come back and say, that's selfish of you. I don't think that it is selfish to have boundaries that protect your well
right.
being. But
Right.
someone could look at that and be like, that's selfish, right? And so if
Yeah,
that's true, then like, hell yeah, be selfish, right? And
exactly.
then we don't want to go to the opposite state of the like open non-monogamy folks who are so self that they don't even
Oh,
think about how their actions are impacting other people,
yeah,
you know? So like it's like center yourself and your community at the same time, folks.
exactly. Like you've got to find that balance. Like there
Yeah.
are certain times when, at least for me, there is certain times when being selfish is literally like what saved my life. Like
Yeah.
if I would have continued down that journey, and I remember like I had came to my mom when I was like 16 years old, and I was like having this like really, I mean, just like, typical teenage depression plus like I'm a queer person that's stuck in a church
Sure.
with like all these other things. And I was like,
Yeah.
really feeling at the end of my rope. And I like came to my mom and I was just like, I think what I said to her was like, I wish I could just fall asleep and not wake up.
Mm.
And she sent me to the church pastor to have me talk with the church pastor. And I remember like
Wow.
trying to find the words to tell him that like I think I'm gay and I don't
Yeah.
know what to do about that. But I,
Yeah.
I couldn't because that was the pastor of the church. So I ended up spending all this time more or less thinking that like this is just like something that I'm going to have to live with, or something that I'm just going to have to like have this secret of
Mm.
like I would tell myself like, oh, I'm just like never going to come out. Like I'll
Mm.
just continue to like live in this like secret life
Yeah.
where I like do these things on the side and no one knows. And it became like so unbearably miserable that I had to be like, I'm going to die if I do not start focusing on what I need and start going after those things that I
Yeah.
need for
Right.
me. And I
Right.
need to start being selfish and start
Right.
like, really searching for what it is that I'm missing in my life. And that turned out to be that like sense of touch of not even just like, physicality of like touching someone else, but also just like being heard in a way that's like, this person actually cares about me and isn't
Yeah.
just like being there to listen to me so that way I, am able to go to church next Sunday,
Right.
which was essentially what I was being given. And,
Right.
yeah, so I kind of struggle with that, or not struggle. I like to talk about that, need to be selfish while also
Totally.
being selfless for the community, because I'm gonna forget who the author of it is, but there's this like review of Alexandra Kollontai's Red Love, and it talks about how this concept of red love, which I've kind of come to terms with it being more close to like relationship anarchy, and it's like this ability to build like equal and free relationships, sexual
Mm,
and non-sexual,
mm,
focusing on the self and also the community. It's like this,
yeah.
I forget exactly the statement and the wording, but it's like it had such an impact on my brain that I was like,
So cool.
this life is constantly this balance. Like you have to be able to like play with these different like sexual and non-sexual and yeah, like work and non-work and all these different aspects of life. It's like this constant balance and it's not just one or the other. And so that the relationship anarchy, like finding this avenue has really been
Mm,
very life-changing for me. And I'm
yeah.
like so excited that it's like being given the time and energy that it
Mm,
deserves finally. At
yeah.
least for me, it's what it feels like finally. I don't know.
Totally.
I find it very funny because like I was so like in the closet in so many different ways that like all of this stuff feels new and I'm like, why haven't anyone been talking
I
about this? And it's like,
know.
oh, I guess people have been talking about it. I just haven't been aware of it. But I'm like,
Right.
this needs to be talked about more then because more people need to hear about
Totally.
how life-changing and how life-saving this can be.
Absolutely. Really to see the beauty of all of our relationships, right? And all the
Totally.
different capacities and the freedom and
Yeah.
the intentionality. Yeah, I mean, that sounds like relationship anarchy to me.
Right?
I'll have to check it
Yeah.
out. And yeah,
Oh,
I'm,
well, I will also say, like, Alexandra Kollontai is also like a Bolshevik, so she was also like involved with Stalin. There was also
oh,
like
fascinating.
there's also some like critiques to go with it. So like,
Sure,
be,
totally.
be a good
All of our
anarchist and
heroes
think
are
critically.
human are humans with
Yeah,
complicated pasts, man.
exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Totally.
Like,
And yeah.
be critical. That's
Yeah.
honest. Like, I know it's like it feels redundant to say, but like, I love like recommending these things to people and then also being like,
And
uh,
also,
and also like
yeah,
here's some other things like just
totally.
keep in mind like what this person was up to and like why they might have written it in such a way like I'll be honest, I didn't read all of Red Love, so I don't know all there is to it, but
Sure.
I find the concept to be very akin to relationship anarchy, and so
Yeah.
that kind of like sparked me into like diving more into that rather than like
Hmm.
a full understanding of what Colin Ty was talking about in talking
Sure.
about Red Love. Like that
Sure.
that statement enough for me was like, okay, I'm sold.
Got it. Yeah. I'm sure you'll love all the different relationship anarchy interviews I
Oh,
have. Yeah.
I trust me. I've been like going back and like playing through all these old episodes that I've like
Nice.
like I said, I've become a newly fan, and so I'm like
Yeah.
recommending it to
Oh,
everybody. I
I
was
love
like
that.
having a little listen group with some friends online the other
Wow.
day. Yeah, it
That's
was
so
very fun.
cool.
Yeah.
God, that's so cool. I love to hear that.
I have like this sort of I don't know, this like double way of thinking about it in that
Yeah.
like obviously like the numbers are good. We love to see this content like get the views and the listens that it deserves. But then
Right.
like my one listen, even though it's only displaying it as one person listening, there's probably like five or six other people that are also listening to it. And so like I love to be able to like show and experience share this with other people, but then I'm also like, but if each one of you went and listened to it on your own, that would have been like five or six more listens. You know what I mean?
That's
Like,
okay.
you
I'm just
know,
happy to hear that you were talking about it in community. I don't give a shit how many listens that we're
I
actually making
love that.
ripples.
I
That's
love that.
great. Like
Okay.
that's gonna change lives. I don't care how many
Yeah.
plays. Like it's changing psyches, and that's like real social change,
Right?
grassroots. That's
Yeah,
cool.
totally. Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've dabbled in YouTube content creation myself, and so like yeah, I have a very similar belief to you in that like
Mm,
as long as it's causing conversation to be made, like the first video that I made like didn't it's not like a banger, it's not like thousands of views, it's got like 500 views, it's not like
right.
anything crazy, but like
Right.
it opened so many conversations with people that I had either fallen out of like talk conversation
Mm,
with, or it opened whole new friendships that like I would have never thought
yeah.
would have been possible. Like people that I thought that I'd like discounted as like they're probably not even gonna watch, let alone give me any space to actually hear what I have to say. And then they like come back and they're like, hey, I not only did I watch this, but this was like one of the more
So
profound things, and I'd love
cool.
to hear more about it. And I'm like, oh my God, that's all I ever wanted with this. So
Yeah.
like I have a very similar
Mm,
idea as you, in that like as long as these things are creating conversation
right.
and causing ripples to be made,
Yep.
that's really all I care about. But I
Absolutely.
also understand the grind of like the algorithm and trying
Sure,
to
sure, totally
trying to
reality.
get trying to get, more
Yeah.
listens, so that way you can actually like, afford to survive in life. And like, I don't know.
Student
It feels
loans, man,
like,
they're big. They're
oh,
big. Roar.
trust me. I've been struggling for so long with mine. I didn't even end up
Yeah.
graduating. I like ran out of
Oh
money and I had to
no.
like drop out, and I'm like, now I have $50,000 in student debt. Now what do I do?
That's low compared to what I'm running at, but that doctor is intense.
I believe it. I believe it. Trust me.
Well,
I believe it. I
need
can't
a social
even.
justice platform for that one day to rant and talk about that, but that's a later down the career
Yes,
pathway.
totally. Totally.
Yeah, but I really appreciate you coming into the space today and
Oh,
creating another beautiful conversation to share with the world that will have ripples out into consciousness. And so I really
mm.
want to thank you for that. And so before we end, I always like to take a deep breath with my guests and see if there's anything else that you wanted to say to the listener. Otherwise, I can guide us towards a closing question.
The last thing that I would like to leave with the listener was also another question that,
Mm,
upon I listening to the podcast,
yeah.
I struggled with what is it that I would like people to take away from listening to our conversation.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, I really think that the need for people who are older and more experienced need to be willing to listen and work with and help young people. I think that is going to be the only way that we are going to be able to see any kind of long-term change in the world. Because unfortunately, for people like me who have been forced through this very traumatic experience of being forced into a very religious home and family and life, there's a lot of damage that's been done to me that, I've been processing and working through and have become a better person for it. We're going to need to create space for these young people to grow where they don't have to go through these traumatizing things in order to become powerful and self-actualizing.
Hmm.
And I think that starts with, at the very least, starting to just have conversations with children. As maybe as scary and daunting as that sounds, being able to treat young people in your daily life as if they are just like you or I is going to be so profound for them. And
Hmm.
honestly, in my experience, it's so profound for me. Like, the first time a young person asked me what my gender was kind of like blew me back. I was
I'm
like, I
sure.
can't believe that we are at a place where a young person is asking me, like a 7-year old at the grocery store I was working at asked me, what pronouns do you use? I was like, wow, I can't believe that we've come so far that like a someone who is like, their parent was like grabbing something else. Like, this person is just like asking me how I identify. I can't believe that that's where
Mm,
we are today, because
yeah.
like that was not something that I would have ever thought to do when I was that young. And
Hmm.
I'm just like, if we continue to like give these young people the space to grow and learn and fumble and help them up, because they're going to fall, they're going to make mistakes, and they're going to need an experienced hand to help them in a non-coercive way that's just like, it's okay to make these mistakes, but here's how you can maybe do it better in the future. And like,
Mm,
I think that for me, the youth liberation aspect of the radical left has been unfortunately forgotten over the years. And I think that it is so vital to moving forward, because again, all of these things are not for us. It's
right.
for the future generations to come. And so that
Hmm.
means that you have to be willing to listen to the young person in your life that you maybe think like discredit and discount, and like, yeah, maybe they do are, maybe they are young and naive and don't know any better, and maybe you do know better. I'm not gonna say that all children are like the epitome of perfect or whatever. Like, I have my
Right.
fair share of bullies. I know that young people can be very mean. I'm very aware of that fact.
Right.
But it's also, like, important to be like, but why is this young person being so mean to me? Why is this young
Hmm.
person's initial reaction to be so hateful? Like, there
Yeah.
are certain aspects of these things that are much more hierarchical that we don't think about. And we just kind of like, I don't, it's something that I've been having conversations with leftists a lot recently, or like, post leftists, however you want to describe yourselves, in that there's like this, oh, I don't like kids, keep them away from me. And it's like, that's not the answer either, babe. Like, there's
Sure.
gotta be a more like
Right.
nuanced answer to this. And I think that
Right.
at the end of the day, it's just to be able to have conversations with young people and figure out what exactly it is that they're missing in their everyday life that's making them have such adverse reactions to the things around them. And a lot of the times it's probably something that you can't do anything to change. Like, a
Hmm.
lot of these things are so hierarchical above your power as a one singular person.
Right.
It- giving them the space to be able to voice in a way that's like completely void of judgment is just going to be so vital to their livelihoods. I mean, really.
Hmm.
So, yeah, I think we just
Yeah.
need to start listening to children and talking with them and figuring out what it is
Hmm.
that they need and giving them space to be able to vocalize what it is they need.
Totally. Yeah. Coming back to that community, right?
Yeah,
Having
totally.
intergenerational relationships and seeing that as an
Yeah,
important part of it, right?
totally.
And just, yeah, the importance of respect, the power dynamics there. And again, like you said earlier, like we're planting the seeds for those trees and the shade
Yeah,
of those future generations. And so
totally.
to move through the world with connection to the younger generations, not to just be in the silo of all your like adulty friends, but like, what does it mean to stretch
Exactly.
across and have those, even just for pure
Yes,
perspective, folks? Like,
exactly.
so yeah.
Totally.
Well,
Yeah.
I really appreciate you. And if
Yeah.
it feels good, we can move towards that closing question.
Sounds great to me.
Okay. So then the last question I ask every guest is, what is one thing that you wish other people knew was more normal?
Last question that was stumping me.
Yeah.
So the thing that I think I wish people knew was more normal would probably have to be the feeling that you have where you're told that the unconditional love from your family is supposed to be something that you're just supposed to have is not normal, actually. That feeling that you have of like, why is it that like I'm being told that I'm supposed to unconditionally love my dad, but he continues to use these slurs with me? How, like, that, I don't feel unconditional love for this person.
Yeah.
And that is normal. You're not supposed to feel an unconditional love to the people around you that are making you feel like shit on a daily basis. And a lot of cases, that is the people in your family. And that is unfortunately a lot more normal than I think a lot of people are willing to admit to themselves.
Totally. I think it's really difficult to hear that a lot of people's most abusive relationships are their families, right?
Totally.
And just maybe then we want to normalize like chosen family.
Yeah, I find the chosen family archetype to be something that I've been kind of struggling with in my own mind of like there is also sort of like a discrimination that comes with the idea of chosen family. You're still choosing who it is that is around you. And like obviously, yeah, like you should not probably involve yourself with like Nazis. Like that's probably a good boundary to have. But at the same time, again, I'm going to forget now who it was that you had the conversation with, but
Mm,
I'm remembering the conversation that you had where there was sort of like the conversation was about sexual abusers being brought back into the fold of community and like holding that space for like accountability and like yeah, unfortunately or fortunately, we're still going to have to like come up with solutions and have answers to these things of like these people who have wronged us and still have space for them to be able to live. Like
Right.
that is a very complicated,
Mm-hmm.
nuanced thing that I personally don't have an answer for, but it is something that when I start to think about chosen family, it does sort of start to make me feel a little worried that, there's going to be still like this, like, I'll allow you in, but not you. It's
Right.
like there is something, I don't know, maybe
I
I'm
hear
being too
you.
picky about it, but like it does make me feel a little trepidatious, maybe.
Yeah, totally. I think it's like
Yeah.
when people call out this question as the normalizing of like, no, like nothing should that's a statistical, category. We don't want to, let's get away from the normal, where I'm like, yeah, I
Yeah.
hear what you're saying. So I
Yeah.
hear you in terms of like the chosen family, right? And I think what
Yeah.
I'm hearing is the nuance of what does restorative justice look like for a deeper community
Totally.
connection. So we
Totally.
want to normalize like our interconnectedness
That
with
part.
boundaries, right?
Yeah.
Like, and what does
That
that look?
part.
And you're right.
Yeah.
I don't know what that looks like. I'll keep reading the anarchist text and being in conversation,
Exactly.
and I'll
And
die, and the future people will pick that one up because I'm gonna do my best at it. But
you
I'm
know,
just
I
human.
I really think that the answer is to be found in conversations like these,
Yeah,
not
totally.
necessarily in the texts, for me anyway, because,
Yeah,
like, I don't know, I can read these things 1,000 times over and I'll be like, that sounds fucking great. I'm super on board. And then I go out and do it, and I try to like bring it into my everyday and try and do it and enact that. And I'm like, this is really hard to do by myself. And I would really
totally.
love to have somebody that's like
Community.
in my corner that I can have conversations with about this, and we can like
Yeah,
figure out these answers together, because like, yeah, there's not going to be a one answer fix all for any of these problems. Like, we're going to have conversations like this, and so the only answer is going to be from having conversations with each other about these things.
yeah. That's some
Yeah.
anarchy. Pull it back to the
Yeah.
community. Let's figure it out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Well,
Oh,
it
it
was
all comes
such a
back.
joy. Yeah, it was such a joy to
Yes.
have you on the podcast
Oh
today.
my
Thank you
God.
for joining us.
It's such an honor. Thank you so much. I
Yeah.
really appreciate this.
hmm Well, then, where can listeners find you if they want to connect with you and your world?
Yeah, so I am Thickie Comrade on just about every social media. I have my YouTube channel. I have 2 videos up right now. Not anything like, super glamorous or anything, but they're like little dabbles and little experiments into trying to have conversations with people. So I've been working on a really long-term project now for like the last like 7 months, and I'm hoping that I'll have a video out soon about that.
Cool.
But like, it's a really long like media analysis with involving like young people in the internet, and it's becoming way more complicated than I initially
Oh,
thought. So it's
no.
become like a journey. So that YouTube is probably the best place to look for me for that.
Cool.
Every other platform I have like varying content. Instagram is all my my knitting projects that I do, and then
Cool.
Twitter is just your stereotypical shit posting. It's
Lovely.
become just like, Twitter's kind of dead, so it's just kind of like playing around on the playground where nobody else goes
Mhm.
to anymore. So I don't know,
Sure.
it's still kind of fun, but yeah,
Totally.
Thickie Comrade is where I'm at. Yeah,
Great. I'll have all of that linked below. And again, I
thank
just want to
you.
thank you for coming on to the show today.
Thank you so much for having me in this conversation.
If you enjoyed today's episode, then leave us a 5-star review wherever you listen to your podcast. And head on over to modernanarchypodcast.com to get resources and learn more about all the things we talked about on today's episode. I want to thank you for tuning in, and I will see you all next week.